So our vertical stretch or shrink, we've talked about this before. We have a number outside of parentheses, and it is multiplied by the function. A number outside of the parentheses means multiplied by the function. If that number is greater than 1, it is a stretch. If the number is greater than 1, it is a stretch. That makes sense. If it's a big number, it's going to stretch it far. And then if it is a shrink, that number is between 0 and 1. Between 0 and 1, it becomes a shrink. So that is review. We've talked about that. Just make sure that we know that the number is being multiplied outside. New stuff, horizontal stretch or shrink. Horizontal stretch or shrink. All right, we're going to do this. Everybody give me an absolute value. Give me an absolute value. Now. Horizontally is left to right, side to side. Horizontally, I want you to stretch your arms out. Horizontally. Pull them apart. That is a horizontal stretch. It gets wider. All right, shake it out. Okay, give me an absolute value. Now we're going to do a horizontal shrink. So we're going to shrink them closer to the y-axis. Closer, closer. That's a horizontal shrink. Horizontal shrink goes horizontally shrinking, right? And your arms get narrower. It's completely opposite of what we did for stretch and shrink vertically. It's totally opposite because horizontal is always opposite. Always opposite. So anything horizontal, remember, is opposite. So when we do a horizontal stretch or shrink, there's going to be a number inside of the parentheses. It's going to be a number inside of the parentheses. And you'll see that this number is like multiplied by x. But when we talk about stretch or a shrink by a factor of just a by a factor of a number. When we remember how we had to write that, it was a stretch by a factor of 3. Remember we had to write that for vertical? Okay. And what we did for vertical was we multiplied by that number. Horizontal is opposite. So we're never going to multiply by the number. We're actually going to multiply by its reciprocal. We're going to divide by the number. And we're going to multiply by its reciprocal of whatever this factor is here. So I'm going to write, we divide by the factor, and that is what they are talking about up here being D. Or instead of dividing by it, you could multiply by its reciprocal. I don't know about you, but for me personally, if I have a choice between division or multiplication, I'd rather do multiplication. So instead of dividing, we could do or multiplied by the reciprocal. So that D value that they have here is already reciprocated. It's already reciprocated. So for a horizontal stretch, you know how vertical stretch was a number bigger than 1? Horizontal stretch is a number between 0 and 1. So it's totally opposite of what vertical was. And a horizontal shrink is the number that's greater than 1. It's totally opposite of what vertical was. Okay? As long as you remember, if it's horizontal, it's opposite. You'll be good. And then this at the very top of my page says, just remember if there's a negative that has nothing to do with the stretch or shrink, that's a reflection on top of the stretch or shrink. So they could be together. So we're going to write the equation of stretches or shrinks of functions. So here is our f of x equals absolute value x minus 3 minus 5. So that's our starting function. And we're going to write a function g whose graph is a horizontal shrink of the graph of f by a factor of 1/3. First question, what is the name of the function? Hello? Sure. Hi. Hi. Okay, what is the name of this function? G of x. Let's try that again. Remember yesterday? You yelled it out or something? Remember that? You don't remember. What is the name of this function? G of x. Right. So we're going to go with g of x. And g of x is a horizontal shrink of the factor of f by 1/3. So what we are trying to think now is we are doing horizontal. And if it's horizontal, where does it go? Inside the parentheses. So we're going to do f of, and it's going to go inside the parentheses. But since it is horizontal when it goes inside those parentheses, we have to make it opposite of what the factor is. So it says it's a factor of 1/3. So instead of multiplying by 1/3, let's divide by 1/3. But I don't want to do divide by 1/3. Does anybody else want to divide by a fraction? So instead of dividing by a fraction, let's multiply by its reciprocal. What are we going to multiply by? 3. So inside here, we're going to put 3x. Always has to be opposite. We just use the reciprocal because that's the same thing as dividing. And then remember yesterday when we have f of something, all you do is take x and replace x in the function with that something. So we're going to rewrite the function, but instead of x minus 3, it's going to say 3x minus 3 and then minus 5. So we'll have g of x equals the absolute value of, instead of x, we put 3x minus 3 minus 5. And then can I simplify? Can I subtract 3x minus 3? Why not? 3x minus 3, why can't I subtract those? Why? Not like terms, right? Can I subtract minus 3 minus 5? You can't, because there's these big walls that say, nope, can't pass. So this is it. This is all we can do. I do want to show you something, though, that we are going to use in the future when we start graphing with these. They will require you to, when we go to graph these, we're going to require you to do some factoring. Do you remember factoring? Maybe you don't remember how to do it. Do you remember the term factoring? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what's in here, and do you see that both 3x and 3 have a greatest common factor, something in common? What do they have in common? 3, right? So I'm going to undistribute that 3. I'm going to undistribute it. I'm going to factor it out. So I'm just going to rewrite this as g of x equals absolute value 3 parenthesis x minus. So if I factor out that 3, what does minus become? Right here. If I factor out the 3, if I take out the 3, what's here? I divide out the 3, Ellie? 1. So you're undistributing. I should be able to distribute the 3 back in and have it equal that. And then minus 5. So you won't need to do that on today's assignment, but you will eventually. Someone start showing you as soon as possible. Okay, B is write a function h whose graph is a vertical stretch of the graph of f by a factor of 2. So what's the name of the function? H of x. So we're going to put h of x. And then we say, all right, it's a vertical stretch. It's a vertical stretch. Where does vertical go? Outside of the parentheses. and it's a factor of 2. And since it's vertical, I don't have to change anything. I put a 2 outside of the function. So I put a 2 outside of that function. So I have 2 parentheses f of x. And then we're going to go up and we're going to say, what was that function? What is the f of x function? It is absolute value, x minus 3 minus 5. Is that right? I'm not looking. Is that what it is, guys? Yes. Okay. So I have 2 multiplied by that function. Now is that simplified? No. I have these parentheses that I could actually distribute the 2 into. So I'm going to take that 2, but remember it can't go inside of the absolute value. This goes in front, and then it's also going to go to the 5. So we'll have h of x equals 2 absolute value x minus 3 minus 10 as our final answer. So you saw how we multiplied the entire function. We multiplied both terms to get that 10. So the next examples say student practice, but we're just going to kind of do them together because I feel like 2 examples wasn't enough. Let's do the next 2 together also. If you are working ahead, that's great. Just make sure you're checking your answers with me also. So the next one is f of x equals 4x plus 2. We're going to do a horizontal stretch by factor of 2. We ask ourselves first, horizontal, where does that go? Inside, right. Oh, and what is the name of our function? It's way up here. It's g. So we're going to do g of x equals, and we're going to do f of, and we're going to put it inside the function. But if it's horizontal and it goes inside, what happens when it goes inside? It's got to be a reciprocal, right? It's got to change somehow. So what is the reciprocal of 2? 1/2. So we have the reciprocal, 1/2 x. We talked about this yesterday. If you do f of something, that means take this and completely replace x with that. So we're going to completely replace x with that. We're going to have g of x equals 4 parentheses 1/2 x plus 2. So we completely replace x with 1/2 x. Completely replace x with 1/2 x. And then does it simplify? Yeah. 4 times 1/2. 2x plus 2. 2x plus 2. Is that a question? Just so intense, like, give me more. I'm loving this stuff. All right, so let me give you more. Number 6, f of x equals absolute value of x minus 3. And then we have a vertical shrink by a factor of 1/3. So vertical shrink. What do we know about anything vertical? Where's it go? Outside of the parentheses. So I'm going to have some parentheses. It's going to go outside. If it's vertical, do I need to change 1/3 if it's vertical? No. Vertical, you never have to change it. It's just the way it is. So 1/3, we're going to multiply by the f of x. So g of x is equal to 1/3 of absolute value of x minus 3. So we have 1/3 of that function, 1/3 of the f of x. So should I simplify that? Yes. we're going to distribute the 1/3, and it does not go inside the absolute value, just in front. We get g of x equals 1/3 absolute value of x. And then what's 1/3 times 3? 1. And that's the simplified function. All right. Almost done. Halfway done. Okay, now example 5 is combining transformations. We're going to have more than one transformation. And order does matter. So you will see when you read this, it says, let the graph of G be a vertical shrink by a factor of 0.25 followed by a translation of 3 units of the graph of f of x equals x. So that followed by means you have to do the first thing first, the second thing second. You can't switch the order or you could get it wrong. Sometimes it works if you switch order, but not every time. Let's just go in order every time. So we're going to first do the factor, the vertical shrink by a factor of 0.25. So since we have a first and then a second, I'm going to have a first equation and then a second equation. So I'm going to have this kind of like in-between middle equation thing. When I'm done, what do I want to name my done equation? What do I want to name it? G of x. So what can I name my in-between equation? Nope, that one's f of x. First one's f of x. So what should I name the in-between one? H of x, okay? It doesn't really matter. Just something that's not f and something that's not g. So we're going to have an in-between function. So I'm going to start with my h of x. My in-between function is a vertical shrink by a factor of 0.25 of the f. It's a vertical shrink. So if it's vertical, where does it go? Outside. So we're going to have 0.25 parenthesis f of x. So it goes outside of the function. And then from there, I'm going to put in the function. What is the f of x function? What is the f of x function? What does it say f of x is? Okay, so that is what I'm putting in. Instead of f of x, I'm making it x. So 0.25x, I just multiply those together, there you go. I simplified it. So you simplify it first. Now we're going to do our final function. So now we're going to do g. G of x is going to be this part after the first part. So I'm going to do g of x according to h of x. So g of x is the translation 3 units up. So is that 3 units up? Is that vertical or horizontal? So where's it going to go? Outside. So we're going to take our h of x and we're going to add 3. So g of x is going to be 0.25x plus 3. And then can I go ahead and add those together? Simplify? Can I? No, because they're not like terms, so that's it. It is possible you could get that answer without writing all this G and H and stuff. If you could get that answer without having this first step, you could get that answer. But I'm going through all the steps to make sure that everybody is following. That you could get that answer without doing all the steps. Okay? So number 7 says, let the graph of G be a translation 6 units down, followed by a reflection in the x-axis of the graph of f of x equals absolute value of x. So we're going to have our in-between function. Here's followed by. We got to have the first function. Okay, h of x is 6 units down. Is that vertical or horizontal? Vertical, so where does it go? Outside. So we're going to have f of x and then minus 6. So our h of x is our f of x, absolute value of x, minus 6. Anything to simplify? No. So now we're going to do our g of x. And our g of x has a reflection in the x-axis. Is that vertical or horizontal? Okay, vertical. So is it going to go on the outside or the inside? Outside. So we will have a negative on the outside of whatever h of x was. Now you look up h of x is absolute value of x minus 6. So g of x is negative, parenthesis, absolute value of x minus 6, close parenthesis. Can that be simplified? Yes. What can I do with that negative 1 that is in front? It's a negative 1. I'm going to multiply that through. I'm going to distribute it. So we're going to distribute that negative 1 to both terms. We get negative absolute value of x plus 6. All right, last one, we're going to model the mathematics in a real-life situation. So it says that you design a computer game. Your revenue for X downloads is given by f of x equals 2x. That's your revenue. Do you know what revenue means? Yeah, it's the money you're bringing in. That's the money you're making. Your profit is $50 less than 90% of the revenue. So the revenue is the money you're bringing in. The profit is the money that you make after you pay off stuff. Because you can't develop something and put a product out there without paying some money somehow. So the profit would be like the money you make on top of after you pay off everything. So revenue is just all the money coming in. Profit is after we subtract off the stuff that you had to pay for. So your profit is $50 less than 90% of the revenue for X downloads. Describe how to transform the graph of F to model the profit, and then what is your profit for 100 downloads? So you have 2 questions. Let's write the equation. $50 less than 90%. It does not say, do this, followed by do this. You have to kind of know what happens first. $50 less than 90%. What do you have to do first? You've got to find the 90% first. Even though it comes second in the question, you've got to find that first. So, and then we'll do $50 less of that answer. So the first thing we're going to do is 90%. Remember, if it's percent, it means, if it is percent, it means per 100. So we do 90 per 100, and we write that as a decimal, 0.9 or 0.90. And then we do that of the function. We do that of f of x. So we're going to have g of x is equal to 0.9 of 2x. So you do 90% of that 2x. Then we simplify. So now we have g of x equals, we multiply these together, 2 times 9 is 18, but there's a decimal, so 1.8x. After we do 90%, then what do we do? 90%, then what do we do, David?
Subtract 50.
Subtract 50, so I'm going to minus 50 from that. And that will be our profit function. The second part of the question says, what is your profit for 100 downloads? So 100 downloads, the number of downloads is x. So for 100 downloads, we do g of 100. What does that mean if I do g of 100? You put 100 wherever you see an X. You replace it with the X. So I have 1.8 parenthesis 100 minus 50. Wherever you see an X. Now the G of 100 is just the directions. It tells us what we put in. You don't do anything with that. You just simplify the right side. 180 minus 50. So our profit is $130. Okay, so your assignment is on Big Ideas again on the computer, and you have some time to get on it. And if you had to do yours on paper yesterday, you can go plug in your answers from yesterday during this time also. Make sure you are saving as you go, and you probably want to keep your notes out, and if you need scrap paper, oh, look at that. There's some right there. Because sometimes, you know, it might crash, and if you didn't save all your answers and you didn't write them down, then, here we go. So go ahead and grab your computer, maybe grab somebody near you so not everybody has to come up. And I will be around to help you.